Welcome to Beyond the Books podcast. I'm your host, Susan Stotterell. Today, my podcast is entitled How the Political Climate and Anti-Intellectualism Are Harming American Education and Literacy. It adds additional information to my June 11th podcast of the same name. Some current political rhetoric aims to do away with quality education by implementing book bans, closing libraries, and drastically cutting funds for education. One type of literacy they do not want students to learn is civic literacy. This involves learning to take part in civic activities, which bring about a positive change in the community and society by investigating and evaluating what is happening and making a just decision for all concerned. Another foe of anti intellectuals is multicultural illiteracy, which teaches students how to understand and appreciate the similarities and differences between customs, values, and beliefs that are different than their own. However, the biggest threat to them is critical literacy, or the ability to analyze and critique the underlying messages in texts, media, and foster critical thinking and active inquiry. Very simply put, to be able to decide what is false and what is true, and whether someone is trying to dupe you. In the June 11th podcast, I mentioned the significant influence of Puritan John Cotton on the laws and politics of Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1642. He believed the primary purpose of education was to instill religious values and ensure that children grew up with a strong moral foundation that jived with his opinion of same. He feared secular knowledge would lead his believers away from true religious truths and moral righteousness. All learning should glorify God and support the religious community as he perceived it. Not all Puritans believed his way. In Richard Hofstadter's 1963 book, Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, Hofstadter explores the cause and outcomes of anti-intellectualism in the U.S. He defined anti-intellectualism as the resentment and suspicion of an intellectual mindset and those who lead an intellectual life. Anti-intellectuals have a tendency to minimize the value of intellectual pursuits, regardless of their type. He sees a connection between anti-intellectualism in the colonial era and the current evangelical Protestant movement. In both, intellectual rigor is considerably less valuable than practical knowledge and spiritual fervor. In addition, he found that in making education accessible to all people, it unexpectedly contributed to anti-intellectualism. As education became more accessible, there was a tension between maintaining educational excellence and broadening access. Populist movements also often view intellectuals as elitist and disconnected from the common people. This fuels anti intellectual sentiments. They view intellectual elitists just as the colonists viewed aristocracy. This causes those who are anti intellectual to stress practical and utilitarian education, and in addition, try to eliminate intellectual and critical thinking skills. Those of a very rigid and conservative faith often view intellectualism as a threat to their faith. If allowed, even in the slightest, the world will fall into the hands of Satan. Various social and cultural movements, such as McCarthyism and the rise of the Christian nationalist movement, espouse anti intellectual views. Others who also lean this way are those who are skeptical of established knowledge and scientific consensus. Some corporations, political groups, and various types of influencers may use anti intellectualism to encourage conformity and passive acceptance of their dominance and control the population. The other prevalent threat to education and true literacy across the spectrum is the use of a paranoid style in political discourse. This is defined as using heated exaggeration, suspicion, and conspiratorial fantasies. Oddly enough, it's not limited to any individual political ideology, but is found across the political spectrum. Its goal is to demonize political opponents and often using false and destructive conspiracy theories to do so. This distorts political discourse and leads to irrational and extreme political behavior, often violent. I would like to end with a quote from Roald Dahl's children's book, Matilda. Mr. Wormwood is Matilda's father, who is a flashy, unethical, and fraudulent businessman. Matilda's studiousness threatens him and digs deeply under his slimy skin. I don't want to know what it's about, Mr. Wormwood barked. I'm fed up with your reading anyway. Go and find yourself something useful to do. With frightening suddenness, he now began ripping pages out of the book in handfuls and throwing them in the wastepaper basket. Matilda froze in horror. The father kept going. There seemed little doubt that the man felt some kind of jealousy. How dare she, he seemed to be saying with each rip of a page. How dare she enjoy reading books when he couldn't? How dare she? That's all for today. I'm Susan Stodderell, and I hope you will join me again on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month, either on my website or YouTube.